We Are Vineyard.
Welcome to the We Are Vineyard podcast, conversations to help us grow with Jesus and each other. In today's special episode, our host, Jay Pathak, is meeting with Caleb Maskell, Associate National Director of Theology and Education for Vineyard USA. They'll be digging in on topics from our first 12 episodes. Let's listen in.
So, Caleb, we're going to talk about a bunch of things that have been on the podcast.
All right, let's do it.
So I'm conscious of the fact that you have not been introduced. You are Caleb Maskell, Dr. Caleb Maskell.
It's true.
To be fair.
It's true. I'm not the kind of doctor who can actually help you.
Well, not your body anyway.
That's right. Only your soul.
But lots of other ways.
That's right.
And you just keep reappearing on the Ferment podcast, our dear friend Adam.
Exactly.
And you talk over and over.
We do.
So what that does is it sort of disrupts our normal flow
Yes.
where I get to ask you a whole bunch of questions about your story. Adam's already done all that and done way better than I would do. So in my inadequacy, I choose not to do that and simply just tell people, go listen to that there. So we did the same thing with Ted Kim.
Oh, yeah,
Ted
that's right.
had been on. I was like, nope, I'm not going to try and be Adam.
Adam's really good.
He's so
Shout
good.
out to Adam.
He's so good.
He's very good at this.
You listen to the Ferment podcast and listen to Adam. He has a really, really nice voice too.
He does.
He does.
There are many things about Adam that are maybe even a little better.
than his voice?
Than you.
Than me. That's true. It's all true. But here we are nonetheless. And so what I think we should do instead of your story, moving along quickly, is I'd love to hear, you are the Associate National Director for Theology and Education. So why Caleb Maskell? I mean, and all kidding aside, you are brilliant. You could have any number of teaching positions, writing wonderful things for everybody. You could do all kinds of interesting things, and yet you chose to take this position to serve the vineyard. Like, why? Why is Caleb Maskell the A&D of theology and education?
Well, I feel bad. I said that thing about how Adam was better than you at this, and now you're asking me such a nice question.
No, we're too good of friends for you to feel bad.
That's true. I don't. I'm just saying that for the folks following along at home. I took this job because in the very first place, the primary, I love the vineyard and I always have. Mm-hmm. And it's been kind of an odd thing even to explain to like friends and family at times why the vineyard. And the truth is I don't totally know. The vineyard has been, for my entire adult life, my church home. It's been a place where I've grown into my faith. Mm-hmm. It's been a place where I've met people who've invested in me and mentored me. It's been a place where I've had the opportunity to do ministry, right? And to learn what life with God looks like in really all the facets that I know. It's also the place where I was able to process all that I was learning, right? Because I was part of Hyde Park Vineyard Church in Chicago, which was being planted by Rand Tucker in 1997 and 8 when I was at University of Chicago for college. And so I was doing this kind of left foot, right foot, where on the one hand, I was studying theology, philosophy, literature, and then on the other hand, I was church planting with Rand. So all the sound equipment for the church was in my closet in my apartment where I lived with Todd
Somebody's
Kennedy.
Somebody's got to do it. Yeah.
Exactly. So every Sunday morning at 7:30, we were driving amps around the city and taking groceries to people who needed groceries, leading home groups, praying for people, all the things, right?
Yes, church plant stuff.
Exactly.
Like everybody does everything, right?
But what it allowed me to do was realize that it's actually all one thing. So everything I was learning as I'm reading, the classics of, Western philosophy and theology as an undergrad, which were blowing my mind. There was so much integration between what I was reading and studying and what we were actually doing in terms of ministry.
Yeah.
So I felt so grateful, honestly, that the Vineyard is not a place where people are afraid to think. It's not a place where you have to check your brain at the door. Frankly, it's not even close to that. It's a place where my experience is that questions are welcomed.
Yeah.
Because our paradigm that puts, Jesus' teaching about the kingdom of God at the center of everything we do has many doors. The kingdom has all kinds of doors, right? As our friend Josh Williams says, you can come in through the justice door, you can come in through the worship door, the scripture door, you can come in through any number of doors. But what you find in the center is a generative place where all things are from and through and to God, including the things that you discover in your philosophical studies or your theological studies that I was doing. So Vineyard's just been a home. An intellectual home, a spiritual home.
What I hear you saying is that the work that you've done intellectually fits naturally to the work that you feel called to do in the Vineyard. Because, if we're just honest, you and me, like, we're friends. We've been in all kinds of rooms with all kinds of people from all kinds of movements.
Yes.
And by and large, people looking in at the Vineyard would not see us as like a heavily intellectual group of folks.
No,
often.
that's true. Yeah.
They would say, oh, yeah, you're the Holy Spirit worship types, or, you're the folks that, do church planting, even.
Right.
Worship or ministry in the Spirit. And you kind of almost knock yourself down, like you are self-deprecating in a way that gives the impression you're not like heavily intellectual or academic.
Right.
But you're saying, no, my experience, and some of it's, of course, shaped by your context, is that the people that shaped me in the Vineyard, and maybe even the people that did shape the Vineyard, by the way, not just for you,
totally,
were people that really took their minds seriously and theology seriously.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely true. One of the great attributes of the Vineyard that is, in my experience anyway, I don't know that it's always been like this in every room, right? But how I've known the Vineyard is in that kind of self-deprecating way where the goal is never to make yourself a big deal, or even, frankly, the goal is rarely to, I don't know how I want to say this.
Be the smartest person, be the most impressive person.
Yeah. When John Wimber built the Vineyard, he built it with an educational framework in mind, right? He didn't build the Vineyard to be the John Wimber show.
He was a trainer. Yeah.
He was a trainer and an equipper and an educator, right? And so I think, in spite of the fact that Wimber wasn't a theologian, I think what he was continually acknowledging is there's lots of different ways to actually learn the things that Jesus is trying to teach people, right? You don't have to have a Ph.D. or think with great theological acumen to be a person whose mind is deeply formed by the Spirit, right? So, Wimber would put people in rooms where there was experiential worship, creative, interesting, intimate, thoughtful, biblical songs, followed by sets of teaching that were generally, what he was teaching was already written down in a binder that people had in front of them. So there was not like the big reveal, I'm going to give you the 5 secrets to whatever. What he was actually doing was trying to go over and over and over things so that people would be fundamentally equipped to go home and do ministry themselves. And then, of course, the Vineyard sort of became famous for practicing what Wimber taught or what the other people who were working with Wimber taught. So you have ministry time, right? And my experience is that when you're in a college environment or a seminary environment or any kind of graduate school, or you're opening yourself up to be formed. So that way of being a community actually really suits people who are in pursuit of formation, specifically educational formation. Questions don't have to be off the table, right? I think sometimes we think of what it means to equip people theologically as giving them like the box to fill in.
The right answer.
The Trinity is Father, Son, and fill in the blank, right? Holy Spirit.
Hard question 1.
Exactly.
Here's your answer. Right.
When in fact, I think what we want to do is teach people how to think. right? We want to help people to become capable of not just answering the question in front of them, but the kinds of folks who can anticipate and almost see around corners a little bit when the new questions come. What kind of people do we want to be in response to them? So Vineyard has been an amazing place for me in that way. And the more I've walked with Vineyard folks, the more I've discovered a sense of family. Now, that doesn't mean that we're fully an intellectual movement, right? I mean, I don't want to paint a distorted picture. There are definitely folks who, as I started Society of Vineyard Scholars in 2009 with a bunch of friends from our church plant in New Haven, a bunch of folks said to me, I don't even know how this works. Some folks would joke, it's an oxymoron, a vineyard scholar. That's not a thing. And, I think it was mostly good-natured and wait and see, But even the folks who had enough or who were uncertain or were wondering if this was pragmatic or valuable have shown themselves to be people, in my experience, who are open to discovery.
Yeah.
I mean, if the kingdom's not about discovery, I don't know what it's about.
Well, and I'm struck, Caleb, over years now of being around the vineyard and then outside of the vineyard in any number of ministry contexts, how many serious intellectuals have been drawn toward the vineyard.
That's true.
Is really fascinating. Not in sort of a let's go and look at the weird animal at the zoo kind of way, but in a like learning posture.
No, it's true. You think of someone like Dallas Willard.
Yes.
Or someone like Tanya Luhrmann at Stanford, who wrote a book on the vineyard and spent 2 years in a vineyard church doing so, and would say she learned a ton from it, even though she approached it as a secular researcher. Or, we could list.
Well, we just had lunch with the Don Williams.
Yes, of course, Don Williams.
Actual, real, theologically thinking Presbyterian background
Absolutely.
Guy.
Craig Keener.
There's so... We were talking about J.I. Packard, who, had wonderfully affectionate things to say about Wimber and the vineyard. And of course, all of the influences from the Anglican Church. So, even as we're saying, gosh, people look at the vineyard and they're like, historically sometimes say, that's not, you guys aren't really like the intellectual types. Strangely, many have come from within us, and many come to connect to us, which is really embodied in you. Personally, just knowing your life, watching how you operate, you're not just the dude reading books and trying to say smart things.
No.
Though you also read books and say smart things,
I'd rather hear other people say smart things
you
if
lead
possible.
Worship, and you lead small groups, and you sit with, the poor, and because you've been formed in these environments. To your point, these things have shaped you.
No, that's definitely true. I also think to the point about how the intellectual life or the theological life intersects with the way the vineyard is, I think that Wimber and his cohorts, when they were really setting the rails for the vineyard, they actually assumed a lot theologically. They assumed a kind of coherent evangelical culture, right? And not the American evangelical sort of pseudo-fundamentalist culture, but really a kind of broad global evangelical commitment that you could see running through all kinds of movements from, the Catholics to the Pentecostals around salvation and around activism and these kinds of things, the way we read the Bible. So the reason that they weren't doing theology wasn't that they were uninterested in theology. It's just that they thought, because we assume this theology, there are ways that we want to start behaving in the world to build the kinds of churches that will introduce a lot of people to Jesus and enable us to inhabit a kingdom-oriented life. It may be that going forward, some of the theological things that they had assumed are less assumable. Right? And so we may discover, and I think, over the 12 years I've been working in the vineyard around theological things, we may discover that we need to start speaking with a theological voice from the vineyard, because there are people all over our movement right now who've been so formed in both the vineyard and in sort of theological equipping and training. I think we're going to see some really interesting things over the next, decade or more.
Well, and at the sort of ground level of the vineyard.
Yeah.
Our early pastors were people that were trained in other kinds of Bible colleges.
Mm-hmm.
So they're trained within a covenant framework,
Yeah.
or they come from a Calvary Bible College world or a Pentecostal world.
Yep.
But now we have our own homegrown vineyard leaders.
That's totally true.
And
yeah.
they start asking questions like, should I go to seminary?
Mhm.
Where should I go to seminary?
Right.
Like, what kind of seminary? And that's an important question, by the way, that
Yeah.
I know you and I have discussed a lot. But if we're going to step that back a little bit, it's also trying to develop theological training throughout their life.
Yes.
How are they thinking as a small group leader even, for
Yeah.
example? And we've had wonderful initiatives, VLI, VI, I think VBI. There's a
Yes.
lot of V's and I's, various forms of these things.
I do love an acronym.
We do. We do. And there's all kinds of these. And some of these have just popped up within churches.
Yeah.
But I know for you, for me, and even talking to, dear brothers across the pond, brothers and sisters, John and Debbie Wright, and the Mumfords, as they're thinking about the global, there is definitely a hunger and a need for us to develop more kind of frameworks for theology and discipleship.
Oh, that's
education.
definitely true. Yeah. I mean, I think we live in a different world than we lived in, or than Wimber lived in 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. We live in a different world even than the one that Wimber left in 1997. Right. I mean, the world is fundamentally different. And the primary thing that I experience in pastoring people through their discipleship, whether they're new believers or they've been believers for a while, is that you just can't assume anything.
Yes.
Right. And at the same time, I think that a lot of conviction that even pastors have, the things that we say that we believe because we think it's quote unquote, orthodoxy or historic or something, we don't actually understand.
Yeah.
And so I think that we are in a moment where it's very important for us as a movement to be making sure that our pastors and our leaders have a kind of, foundational understanding of the narratives of, the historic church, the church around the world, the nature of the kingdom. Obviously, the teaching of Jesus is at the heart of all of this.
Yeah.
Because it's easily forgotten. And if the historic church has known one thing for 2,000 years, it's the significance of repetition of crucial theological foundations, right? I mean, that's what the liturgy is,
Yeah.
right? Because every culture is going to metabolize those concepts differently in order to meet their moment. And that's, I think, some of the work that's in front of us now. I'm actually really, really hopeful about it.
Well, and I think you're the right guy because you are as connected and like living within the vineyard as a person could be.
Yeah.
And you've dedicated who knows how many hours and who knows how many dollars of educational money
Yeah.
to shaping your mind with brilliant people from all over the country. It feels like it feels timely.
Yeah.
And that also within the things that God has led us to in the vineyard to prepare these different kinds of roles and to prepare. It's really fun. And I just like you. So it's fun to...
I like you a lot.
I do. I really do. So it's really fun to do this work.
Yeah.
And imagine and dream, just sitting with Don Williams. Those of you who don't know who he is, you should just look him up and figure out how to listen to some of his talks. But sitting with Don just for lunch and him snapping in at different points and being like, listen, guys, the kingdom, the cross, he would just snap into Don mode and talk about the gospel for a second. And then he would just tell us to love people better and love one another. He'd do that because that's what he's good at. So to see that we have a heritage in this, and it's an incredible moment. It's a great moment. And I'm excited for you. I think you're the right guy for the right moment.
Well, yeah, I'm excited about it too.
It's a big deal.
And
okay.
we'll see what is to come.
Well, who knows? Yeah. Does anyone know? I mean, as we right now sit here on the verge of potentially World War III, if you listen to the people.
We'll find out.
Putin marching across.
Yes.
Anyway, so yeah, it seems as though we can only do the next thing, but man, it really feels exciting to me.
That's a
Okay,
great
so
moment.
let's review some stuff from the podcast of what we've been doing over this quarter. So now that people have some sense of who you are, now you are thoroughly credentialized.
Oh, yes.
So we can trust you implicitly.
That's right. Yeah.
They're still, they don't know who they're just like, I don't know. That's the guy that asks people questions.
Yeah.
So
He's the interviewer.
yeah, he's the interviewer. That's Jay's job. But we had a bunch of really interesting interviews.
Mm-hmm.
One who is a good friend of yours. And it's worth noting for a moment here that Caleb is in many of the interviews in the background. So if you've been listening to the podcast, you've maybe heard like a laughter that we're trying to edit out in the back that sometimes you can't squish all the way out or cut out. That's Caleb.
That's me
back there. Yeah.
I'm the laugh track.
Yeah, you were the
That's
laugh track.
right.
It's specifically the one with Dave Ferguson. It's like you could not.
It was uncontainable.
You could not contain it. But the one that
Dave thought you were like 60 years old. I think.
He did.
He was for sure.
Which, by the way, I saw him last week.
Yeah.
That came up no less than 10 times. Like, no, just for everyone who heard that, at least 10 times. I was like, well, Dave, since you are so much older
Dave
than
is
me,
pretty old. I mean, how would you guess he's maybe in his 60s?
here's the thing. He runs, he like eats well. You know, it's
Plus, he's very important.
probably has a skincare routine.
Yeah.
I don't have any of that stuff. So
Yeah, that's
anyway,
true.
so to be fair, he's doing more than
Yeah,
me.
he is.
So it's fair. It's a fair thing.
He's well kept.
He's well kept and he's done great. Yeah. And he's a wonderful guy. I mean, we had such a good time with
was
him last
awesome.
week.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's you laughing. But the one that I thought would be good to revisit just for a minute was Andy Crouch.
Oh, yeah.
So Andy's been a friend of yours.
He was my neighbor.
Yeah. he's your neighbor.
Andy was my neighbor when we lived in Philadelphia. So we recently moved to Denver, but before that we were in Philly or Philly suburbs. Kathy, my wife, was the pastor of discipleship at Blue Route Vineyard, and I was the worship pastor. And we had moved there rather suddenly for a bunch of reasons. And I just had this idea that Andy Crouch might live nearby.
He might be around.
So I wrote to a guy who knew him, and I said, "Hey, do you have Andy's email?" And he said, "Sure." I wrote to Andy. He immediately wrote me back. He said, "I would love to get together. Let's get together." So we would meet, and we had a beer once a month for a few months, and we realized, oh my goodness, we're going to be friends.
We're actual friends.
So it was probably one of the great gifts of my life in the last season was getting to be friends with Andy.
Well,
and his wife, Catherine, and their kids. They're just delightful.
Delightful people.
Yeah.
And so he was gracious enough to let us show up in his home.
He's also brilliant.
Brilliant.
I mean, he's the smartest evangelical, I think.
Wow.
That's how I introduce him to people.
That's a thing.
I think he's real. He's really smart.
I mean, I didn't doubt he was real.
No.
I just
he's top of the pile for me.
the smartest. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Well,
Because he's not just intelligent. He can say complicated things very simply.
Yeah, in a clean
And when
way.
he says those simple things, they actually help and equip people. That's the
Yes.
kind of smart I want to be.
Yeah.
Right? I'm sure there are people who've read more, know more. He actually
Right.
has a new book coming out, which I'm really excited to read. And I think Kathy and I are actually featured in the last chapter of it, which
Ooh.
makes me kind of famous.
yeah. Famous by proxy.
But yeah, a guy
From the
who can
assistant
say
to the manager.
existent to the smartest evangelical. But a guy who can say complicated things simply to the church for the sake of the church and the world, to me, that's the best. And that's
Yeah.
Andy in a nutshell.
And so he did this whole thing on how the nature of how creativity kind of works.
Yes.
Specifically in writing.
Yep.
And he tells the beautiful story of like his friends pulling him behind a plastic plant in some convention center to pray for him because
Yeah.
he's like ready to quit everything because
Yeah.
he's supposed to be writing and
Well, his draft was due.
it's due.
And
Yeah.
he'd written something like 5% of it. This is
Exactly.
after his whole bit about how writers lie
They
to
lie.
their editors
They just lie,
constantly.
yeah.
I'm almost done.
Totally.
Every
Totally.
pastor writing a sermon
Totally.
at 2 a.m. on Sunday
so close,
morning.
so
knows
close,
this. Yeah.
almost done.
I'm close.
So close. And as we were sitting at the table,
Yeah.
knowing that you were there with us, I remember sitting at the table and wanting to ask you,
Yeah.
Caleb, I think this is somewhat your story.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so say a little bit about that. It's your dissertation work?
Well, yeah, I mean, most people won't know this, but, I did a Ph.D. and it took me a really long time relatively to write my dissertation. 7 years start to finish when I started writing, which was on the heels of, 5 years of coursework and other stuff. So it was like more than a decade of work. And I was doing other stuff, the temptation is to make excuses about all the other things I was doing. And I was doing other things. But the truth is that the process of writing, the process of moving things from ideas born of research onto a page where you're saying things like in your own words and in your own name. You have to make
a claim.
Making claims, was excruciating for me. And I think every writer likes having written. They don't like actually writing, right? That's kind of a truism. But it may be that people find writing hard for different reasons, right? And it was real interesting to hear Andy talk about that. In my case, and I think Andy alluded to some of this in what he was saying too, in my case, I realized that the work of doing scholarship, and especially doing creative work that has sort of theological underpinnings, right? Where I'm writing things that I take to be existentially significant. So I'm talking to pastors as I'm saying this too, because pastors do this.
You feel the pressure
all the time, right?
I'm taking this super important thing that I'm now entrusted to communicate in a manner that holds the worth of the thing and yet also communicates to the people in front of me.
Exactly. And of course, the temptation is to find ways to say it more perfectly, and that can be an endless loop. What I realized for me is that the challenge behind doing that kind of work was at least as much emotional as it was intellectual, right? And I wasn't prepared for that when I went into the process of trying to write my PhD. I was very well equipped to
do the rigor, like I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that,
exactly.
I'll put that there, that goes here, let's start writing.
But it's much, much harder to say an honest word than it is to multiply words, right? And, my therapist often says, he quotes Pascal, where he says, all of man's troubles originate from how hard he finds it to sit for 1 hour in a room alone.
That's right.
Right? That's not exactly the quote, but something like that.
No, and I've heard it inverted. So I've heard it quoted 9 times different ways.
Yeah,
One of the ways is, all the problems of the world could be solved.
Yes.
If everyone could sit alone in a room quietly for an hour.
Yeah.
That's a real thought.
Well, it is, because the work of speaking truth in love, which is what not everyone writing a PhD is trying to do that, but that's what I was trying to do, is work that requires awareness of where you stand in the world, awareness of what your commitments are, confidence in that stance and in those commitments, but then also the ability to extend yourself from that confidence to others and say, here's something that I would like to say about this, that, and the other thing, right? Probably 3 months before I defended my dissertation, it was half as long as it was at the end.
I love it.
Well, and the reason behind that is I found a place to stand, and I found a sense of myself in an entirely new and unfamiliar way at the very, very end of my writing. Because it wasn't about, can I put the words on a page?
Right.
It was about, do I have the internal fortitude to say what's so for me?
Yep.
And that came, honestly, at a price. It required me to do emotional work.
Yeah.
And what I'm aware of as I kind of move around the world and move around the vineyard is that every single person who's producing anything, whether they're musicians or preachers or even small group leaders, all of us who are trying to extend ourselves in the world that way, our relative effectiveness has so much to do with the degree to which we are emotionally healthy and confident in the place that we stand before God first and then in front of other people.
Well, and I thought that was what Andy's, and I know some of your stories, so I'm cheating.
Yeah.
Where you go and do the work with a few friends, much like Andy's story, who end up kind of dislodging you and going, come on, man, like, let's work on this together. So some of it's personal, emotional work.
Right.
Then it's also communal work. Like,
Yes.
hey, I'm with a people that stand with me that can help me do this work.
Yeah.
But to your point, it's deeply emotional. Like
Yeah.
it takes real risk and vulnerability and effort
Yes.
to learn and listen and apply and put yourself in front of people honestly with what you think God may or may not be doing.
Totally.
And Andy's stuff on that was not just his story, of course, but the different kinds of people we need in our life based on, where we fit in those quadrants. You need a prophet, a priest, a king.
Oh, that was so good when he was saying that stuff.
It's so good.
Yeah.
And, I guess for anybody that listened to that, I guess I would just want to call you back to it for a moment. I don't know if you're like me. I hear good thoughts and then I'm like, that's a good thought. And then I'm like, what do I want for lunch? and I may or may not carry that thought with me.
Right.
And for leaders, I mean, I don't know how Andy would feel about me doing this, but for leaders, it goes both directions.
Mm-hmm.
It's saying, A, which one of those people do I need?
Yeah.
B, how do I be that kind of person?
Yes.
I might have a tendency, like I'm more the prophet. Fine. That's great. That means in the prophet kind of zones,
Yeah.
you're great.
Yeah.
But it also is important that you can say, okay, I can be some of these other kinds of things to be helpful because this isn't about me.
Right.
And or I can build leadership teams or work with different kinds of people.
Yeah.
Where we have different kinds of mutual submission to help one another. I thought that one little set of thoughts, like where do you find yourself in these quadrants?
Yes.
What kind of leaders do you need?
Yes.
Even as you're leading, when you bump into someone in a certain quadrant, how do you adjust to be the kind of leader that they need and or build a community where all of these different kinds of people are helpful?
Yeah.
That's a massive thought.
I would want to just underline that. I agree entirely. And I think it's really significant for ministry because most people who walk through the door of your church, maybe 100%,
Right.
are not coming through the door saying, what must I do to be saved? They're coming through the door saying, is God alive? And if so, can God help me?
Yes.
And so as the people of God, our work is in discernment. Our work is in cultural criticism, if you like, sort of what are the things people are attached to, so that we can speak directly into that place. Yeah. And the degree of vulnerability that it takes for someone to even become open to that conversation is so high that if they walk into that moment and we meet them with dogma or we meet them...
Well, sometimes they need dogma, sadly.
Exactly.
Depends, right.
If we meet them with a thing that's more about us than it is about encountering them in their vulnerability,
that's exactly right.
Then I think we lose massively. And you see this in the life of Jesus all the time, the ways that he responds to different ones.
Yes.
To Zacchaeus, it's can I come to your house? To the woman caught in adultery, it's just protection.
Yeah.
To Nicodemus, it's challenging theological engagement.
Yep.
He brings all those different elements, and that's what I think to minister the kingdom means, to be discerning in that way. So I love Andy's paradigms. I think they're incredibly helpful.
And if, I think on there we gave you some ways that you can engage that with teams and think through those things, use the podcast. I thought that was a super helpful set of paradigms that we even started to talk about on our teams a little bit. Because I can see my tendencies. I can see where, there's some ways that I've grown over years of doing ministry that, I wish I could go back and have done that differently with that person in that moment or with that leader but that, we can only be who we are and we can only know what we know and we can only grow in the ways that we're aware to grow. We can't go backward.
I agree.
But we can go forward.
Yeah.
Each quarter on the We Are Vineyard podcast, we focus in on a theme for all of our interviews. For the first quarter of 2022, the theme is Equipping the Saints. And every month, we introduce a new book or recommended resource to dig in deeper. This month, we're suggesting that everyone reads Managing Leadership Anxiety by Steve Kess. Managing Leadership Anxiety is available through Vineyard Resources and wherever books are sold.
Did you have one you want to do?
Sure. I mean, one that stood out for me that I thought was really powerful was your conversation. This is one I actually wasn't able to come to. Your conversation with Santiago Jimmy Mellado, president of Compassion.
Man, we were both crying. We're like staring at each other crying.
He's an incredible guy, another guy that I've had a chance to become friends with through some things. And he's someone who stood out so vividly to me in the rooms I've been in with him because he listens so well and then he says things that humanize and ground reality, right? No matter what you're talking about, it could be you're talking about the future or you're talking about the nature of this, that, or the other thing. Yeah. He brings it to reality in such an animating way. So when he was talking about his journey to leading Compassion, his journey to the United States, and his experience being a initially third culture kid, and then really a third culture person in the context of leading at Willow Creek, it was just profound. And to me, the conversation that you guys then went on to have about inhabiting kind of third culture spaces was, it was riveting to me, honestly. It's probably my favorite of all. With respect to Andy.
With respect to
my dear friend. I thought Santiago Mellado's was just, I couldn't stop listening to it.
Yeah. Well, and his, first of all, that he's an Olympian.
Yes.
Just pause. Like, what? No. I mean,
give the man some props.
Come on. Yeah. Really?
Yeah.
I mean, come on, man. And, most of you will probably not meet him in person, but you look at him and you're like, this guy could probably be an Olympian.
See it.
I can see it. I can see it. I can see how he stands. Like, he carries himself like, I know how to do things.
Yeah.
No one's ever sat with me and went, this guy probably was an Olympian. like literally never.
Yes.
But, but I was like, man, this guy's impressive. But when that turned into that set of the conversation and he beat me to it, I was almost going to say to him, so you're like a third culture kid. And then he said, I said, well, map that out for me. Tell me how that affected you. I mean, that is, his experience is definitely my experience. I said that a little bit in there.
Yeah.
But to flesh that out a little bit more, because I think it is helpful for people to have these frameworks. I think everybody, especially in the current moment we're in, which is so much more pluralistic and about every environment people live in.
Yeah.
I mean, even in parts that have been pretty monocultural historically in America, in the U.S. specifically, they're becoming really pluralistic. There's different kinds of people.
Yes.
In almost every city in America right now.
Yes.
In a way that it wasn't true. I mean, I might even say 15 years ago.
That's right.
So it means that for those of us that embody the gospel, people that care about the hope that's offered in Jesus, part of the work is to transcend those barriers and those borders.
Yep.
Because of the conviction we have about what Jesus offers everybody. Not just on your upbringing, not just because of the things you're already intellectually sent to. And that really our faith is missional by definition. Meaning it's meant to reach. It's meant to go across a barrier. It's meant to also help within the places you're used to. And that little framework of being like, there's going to be people that have more of a natural inclination for this, which would be like me or Jimmy, because I was raised not really sure who I was, which has its own problems, as a side note, the kind of chameleon nature. But it seems to me, when I'm looking at kind of the moment we're living in right now, I don't think you can adequately think about discipleship if you're not thinking about engaging people that are different than you.
Yeah.
I believe this so fundamentally. A number of years ago, I said this in a class or somewhere. People got really offended, but I thought it was true. I still think it's true. Sometimes when you offend people, it's because it's true.
Yeah.
I said, I'm beginning to wonder how you can disciple Americans in the way of Jesus without removing them from the context.
Yeah.
I'm starting to wonder if I need to take specifically suburban Americans to somewhere in the middle of Africa or into a part of Haiti.
Yeah.
Or into a city in Mexico or into a village in India. To be with people that worship Jesus.
Yes.
In those contexts, so that they might sort of rediscover their faith.
Yeah.
And then have to come home.
Yes.
And look at their house and open their closet.
Sure.
And get in their car and go, wait a minute. So many things that I thought were fundamental to my faith in Jesus.
Yes.
Are actually tied to cultural and sociological ways of living.
Totally.
That I have to sort of divest myself of and or take on some new things.
Well, totally. What you're saying reminds me of, the great missiologist Lamin Sanneh. He taught at Yale for many years. He's a West African guy. I forget the country he was from. But he wrote a book called Translating the Message, in which he says, look, the gospel, that one of the distinctives of Christianity is that the gospel is always in translation, right? The gospel is always being translated into new cultures by virtue of mission. And when that translation is happening, we're actually learning more about the truth of the scriptures specifically and the nature of the scriptures inhabited the gospel of the kingdom than we knew before, right? So when the gospel goes into a new country, people who are already following Jesus should pay attention to the things that happen there so they can understand their own convictions and critique their own convictions with more depth and power.
Well, there's a transcendence that you're suddenly present to.
Yeah. And in that sense, I think also kingdom people who live in the already and the not yet, right? We live in also the present, and we hope for a better country, as the scripture says. I think we're people who are always betwixt and between.
Yes.
Right? And so the degree to which we become satisfied, I think, is the degree to which we cease to follow Jesus in the way that, say, the writer of Hebrews talks about in Hebrews 11.
Yes.
Right? We're always people on a journey. We're an Abrahamic people. And that means we're moving somewhere.
Another land.
We're always going somewhere. Exactly. So I think that's very important.
Well, and what I'm more aware of now, and it might just be because I'm awakening to it. There might be people listening to me going, well, where have you been, Jay?
Right.
But I'd say maybe for the last 15 years, if I'm being more honest and transparent, is most of the cultures that can challenge our presuppositions are in the cities we already inhabit.
I agree.
So the work that we've done with refugees in our churches here in Denver, getting to know people of a different cultural background than you as a means of like growing. I think we've always done this sort of projects like we're going to go to this place to help. But just a small shift in orientation to say, no, I want to get to know another cultural framework.
That's right.
For me, that I discover a different way of life with Jesus. By getting to know these folks and where they come from and how they see the world, sharing meals, understanding their world. So that the gospel, the life that I have in Jesus wakes up in a different way.
Totally.
Because I think for, again, people like me or like Jimmy, those things happen a little more easily. And I don't think I realized that for a long time. It wasn't until I really started traveling around the world I realized, why does this seem natural? But it also has enabled me to move naturally in my own city. You know,
totally.
With different people I didn't know. I don't know your story. I don't know even your own theological background. It's like, tell me about that. I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, I mean, your point about, needing to take Americans out of the United States, I think, it's probably just more and more true that if you learn how to have eyes to see the very place you live, you'll discover that there's a vast plurality of cultures in many, many places. And look, you might live in a very monocultural part of a particular state, but you're within a few hours of a major city.
Well,
right?
And even there, it's amazing. Like, we were just down in the middle of, seemingly nowhere, California, as anyone would define it.
Yeah.
El Centro.
Yeah.
And to discover, I mean, this, of course, is relating to our time talking to Ruben Quintero. And you figure out that Mexicali has great Chinese food. I mean, that like when we get there,
because it was founded.
Do you want tacos?
Yeah.
Or Chinese food? And it seemed really obvious to me.
Right.
Tacos.
Chinese food.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And his kids are standing there and they're kind of looking at me like, and I'm like, well, what do you guys think? They're like, definitely Chinese.
Totally.
And I'm like, what? And then when he described, this city was founded by Chinese immigrants who still live there. I mean, there's a whole section of the city that's all written in Chinese.
Right. Yeah, it's Chinatown.
Okay, so that's unexpected.
For sure.
And yet, those little enclaves live a lot of places.
They sure do.
Through maybe some of the migrant work that might even come through your town.
Yep.
Through people that run restaurants or certain industries, usually. It might be the docks if you're near somewhere where there's one of the coasts, or in the agricultural world or in the manufacturing world, if you're in that kind of place.
Totally.
Tends to bring different kinds of people around.
Yeah.
If you have eyes to see. And I guess what really struck me listening to Jimmy's story and what I've been thinking about since is part of what it is to live out a life following Jesus is to do that work.
Yes.
Is to stretch yourself to be in an uncomfortable place, to learn and understand so that you might be able to embody the gospel differently.
For sure. Yeah. Well, and Jesus' parable of the Good Samaritan, when he's asking, who is my neighbor? Right. Yeah. Or when the person's asking him, who's my neighbor? And Jesus teaches them that parable. Yeah. I believe he's teaching them about seeing and about cross-cultural seeing.
Reach across.
Yeah. Learn how to recognize what's right in front of you.
Yeah. And so for anyone, listening, it's worth asking God. Even now, show me people that aren't like me.
Yeah.
That I can reach toward. I can bridge those gaps. I was really struck, and poor Jimmy and I are staring at each other, tearing up.
Crying.
It got awkward a little bit. I don't cry with strangers a lot, unless it's at a Vineyard conference.
That's right.
But outside of that, there's not tons of that. There was in his office.
It was a powerful conversation.
Yeah, it really was.
Yeah.
Okay, so do we want to do one more?
Oh, I've got one more. Do you have one more?
I had one more, but I want yours more than mine.
Well, I want to talk about Todd Bolsinger.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so Todd Bolsinger is a guy that you and I have interacted with together for a few years.
Wonderful guy.
Worked at Fuller and basically, orchestrated a huge transformation in Fuller's approach to the way the seminary works. He's a very, very thoughtful guy. Wrote a book, Canoeing the Mountains, and then recently another one called Tempered Resilience.
Excellent.
And, Todd had way more to say than you had time to talk with him about in the podcast.
Well, and Todd, as a side note, Todd's a great guy to just jump around and find stuff.
Yes.
Like if you just play around on YouTube or on the internet and just go, let me find Todd Bolsinger saying Todd Bolsinger things, you can find a bunch of stuff.
There's lots of it.
It's worth just, I've fallen into that rabbit hole.
Well, he's very, very good, and he rarely says things that feel irrelevant.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
But he has this thought, which is really the core of Tempered Resilience, his newest book, that leaders are formed in the leading.
Yeah.
And I've heard you tell the story of the church plant when you guys drove out on September 11th, 2001 and tried
time to plant a church.
Tried to plant a church in Denver, and the 10-year nightmare that followed.
At least 10, yeah.
That was a season of your life and Danielle's life where you guys were being formed into leaders while you were leading.
Yep.
I think sometimes in the Vineyard, because our model of leadership is discipleship is leadership is so very common, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of a cycle. We can almost make light of the challenge and the drama and, frankly, the interest that God takes in our formation, usually through our most painful experiences,
Yep.
right? So when you guys were talking about how leaders are formed in the leading, it reminded me of your story. And I would just love to hear you reflect on that a little bit.
Well, I think with Todd, I brought that up because I was like, that part sounds right to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember it was like, hey, talk about that for a minute, because, well, let me put it really starkly, and then we'll make it warmer. To say it really starkly and coldly.
Yeah.
I have a question I ask of every leader that I've ever met that's done something interesting. And I ask it every time if I get a chance. It's not the kind of question you can ask in the Q&A in front of the room. It's the kind you can ask like after everybody's left, or it's not even necessarily the kind you can ask at dinner. You have to ask it after dinner, you know, like you're sitting somewhere quiet. I always want to ask, and I always do ask, what did it cost you? Like, what did this cost you?
Yeah.
And if we've built enough rapport, they can tell you limitless stories
Yeah.
of like the thing they thought was going to happen that didn't happen. And they all have a story of rejection
Yeah.
and betrayal.
Yeah. Betrayal.
I mean, everyone.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, it's so common that I actually wonder if I meet a leader that doesn't tell me about rejection and betrayal, if they've actually done what they said they've done.
Yeah. Totally.
And it's close.
Yeah.
It's not like something that, oh yeah, there was that one person that I tried to, and whatever, and we figured it out and moved on or whatever.
Yeah.
It's costly. It's emotionally costly. It's relationally costly. It's usually financially it costs. And again, I think Wimber, there's all these Wimberisms, don't trust a leader that doesn't walk with a limp.
Yeah.
And I think that was a shortcut way of saying, if the people you're trying to follow don't show you that they've been through a few things, you might not want to follow them. The converse, though, kind of the inverse of that, is leaders go through things that no one will really fully understand unless they try those things. I don't know if I've ever told you this story. It might be, it was the only time I saw Wimber teach live. He came to our conference we were doing for Joshua House, this young adult conference. I have no idea why he said he'd come. Truly, there's no reason to come.
It wasn't the enormous honorarium.
It was just, no, it wasn't that great. There was no reason to come.
Maybe it was the snacks.
Yeah, exactly. It was, it might have just been Rich. Nathan persuaded him, because we sure didn't.
No.
And he comes and he speaks, and he was really sick. He was shooting the pig saliva in his mouth.
Yeah.
He'd done all the chemo to where the salivary glands weren't working. And so he spit this pig spit in his mouth in order to keep talking. And honestly, he wasn't well.
Right.
Like he was wandering, and you could tell he was not able to necessarily stick to a stream of thought, and then he kind of bounced to something else. But it's like he snapped in. If you've ever been with people in this stage of their life, you can watch almost like their eyes focus, and there's like a moment where they're like, and now I'm saying something. They're like fully conscious.
Yeah.
And he's teaching, he kind of wanders on, and then he gets fully conscious and he stops. And he says, I want to tell you something that's just true. You can tell, oh, okay, here we go. I mean, we're maybe an hour in at this point,
right.
So it's like that kind of night.
Yeah.
And he says, everybody's always saying, John, I want your ministry. Would you pray for me that I could have your ministry? You want my ministry? And there's this little like table next to him. And he slams the table with his fist, and like the water falls off and the pig spit and everything. He's really intense. And he says, you won't have what I have because you won't pay what it costs.
Wow.
I mean, I can remember it now. It costs you everything. Everything.
Yeah.
And it was like, you could just, it was one of those that shudders through the room.
Sure.
Like, I don't know what we've been doing to this point, but that's true.
Yeah. Right. And still, I have no idea what it means because I'm 24 or whatever.
I think I was probably 22.
Yeah.
It'll cost you everything.
But it goes in. Yeah.
Oh, man. I'll tell you, I have thought of being in that moment more than once.
Yeah.
Where, there's just moments where you just have to stop and say, this was not my plan. This was not my design. I'm doing the thing that I think God asked me to do.
Yeah.
It's less about what I get done right now and who I become. That's the thing I'm always telling every specifically younger leader. The test is never about the outcome. It's about who you become.
Yes.
And that is the basic premise of Todd's little thing there, right? Like, who are you being formed into?
Mm-hmm.
And if we're really honest, I mean, I'm a little older now. I can look at moments where I didn't really take the whole lesson in. Do you know what I mean? Like,
totally.
There was a thing that I probably should have had a little more courage, or I should have been a little more patient.
Yeah.
And it wasn't about the thing. It wasn't about what happened, because sometimes it actually works out fine. It doesn't, like God cares about us so much. He cares about what he wants to do so much.
Yeah.
That he'll just do what he wants. But I missed an opportunity to be formed differently, more patiently, more courageously. And the church plan is one example, but man, honestly, even a decision like I'm in now to be the national director. It's not like there's no book I read. There was not like an onboarding, class. I did telemarketing. There's for telemarketing, they give you these flip charts where it's like, if somebody says this, it's all tabs.
Right. Right.
You flip that tab. And and you just read it. That's your job. And they've done it so many times, there's tabs. And the truth is, I do have more tabs than I used to, when people ask questions. I have things to do.
Right.
But at every step of risk or faith or growth, there's no tab.
Right.
Like, what do I do when my friend's kid dies? What do I do when there's an affair of like somebody I really love and care about?
Yeah.
And most pastors first try to find the right answer, which is fine. You're supposed to take care of people, go get all the help you can. But honestly, what God's doing is shaping you.
Yeah.
What kind of a leader are you going to be now?
Yeah.
Will you be able to hold those tensions of like, I need to tell like the real truth of this moment and be like entirely gracious?
Yeah.
Like both things I'm going to hold firmly, because that makes you into a different kind of leader.
Right.
Which then will shape your church or shape the things you're leading. But that's primarily what's going on in those moments. And I can look back and see moments I skipped through. I found the right thing to say or the right thing to write, or, you know what I mean?
Totally.
And I feel that poignantly at every growth edge, that this isn't as much about trying to get the right words or run the right play, but become the right kind of leader.
Yeah.
So, that's why I love that part. That's why I drew it out of Todd.
Yeah.
So I was like, can you say more about that? Because that's my only way I understand leadership.
Yeah.
The amount of people that come out of seminary and like, nobody ever taught me this.
Right. Well, it can't be taught.
No.
That's Todd's
That's his
point,
basic point. That's
that, you find yourself into this ideally through obedience, some combo of providence and obedience.
Yeah.
And really the only thing that will make you into the leader that you need to be for that moment is that same combo of providence and obedience.
And the heat.
Exactly.
And the melting.
Yes.
That blacksmithing analogy he gives, which I'd never thought. It's amazing how many things you just don't think about how they work in the world. Like most everything. Like I wouldn't know how to make this table in front of us. But like when he describes, how do you make blacksmithing tools?
Yeah.
Okay,
so that they don't melt.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that they don't smash a thing.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? They're trying to like shape a thing.
Right.
So they have to be strong enough to shape it, but not so intense that they smash it.
Yeah.
And that's a very particular kind of tempered resilience, I mean, to use this language, right? It's tempered, but has the ability to manage. And that's who leaders are. They're people that have been through certain kinds of fires so that they can lead certain kinds of ways. And that means, I mean, even now, I mean, I'm struck by this all the time when I'm with pastors or leaders, and they're like, this is the worst, and this is so hard, and why is this happening to me? And you know, you try to do all the compassionate things you can, and you want to give wisdom because you want to help people. But when leaders lead other leaders, some of the things that you have to say are things like, this is important. This is necessary.
Yeah.
This is about who you're becoming.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think God is saying to you in this moment? Like, who cares what God's saying to me? I have to like help that person over there. I have to manage this thing. No, slow down. What is God saying to you right now? Who is he forming you into? That takes a lot of discipline.
Totally.
When people are in pain and they're reacting.
Of course, because you just want to jump out of the way or get out of the heat.
Yeah, or fix it.
Yeah.
For somebody else or yourself or everybody.
Sure.
Like, fix this thing.
Yes.
But God will take you through the same tests as many times as it takes to shape you into a certain kind of person.
I always think about that with the people of Israel when they're told they're going to walk in the desert for 40 years. And every single person down the generations who's hearing the story of the journey from Egypt to the promised land knows exactly how far that is. They're walking around the block. They're not walking in a straight line. They're going around and around and around. And it's an image of God's desire to form a people who will stay obedient when it comes time to actually do the hard thing.
Have you ever thought about this? These are weird Bible thoughts Jay has. Here's one. I have hundreds of these, by the way. Hundreds and hundreds. I think it might just be not being raised in church. Like you just notice things that people don't who've read the stories a bunch.
Right.
Have you ever thought about the last guy alive?
Oh.
Okay. And everybody's like, just look at me like, how you feeling, man?
Yeah, exactly.
Because they know once he's done, I think we're allowed to do the next thing.
Want to go fight that lion?
Exactly. How you feeling? You sure you feel okay? I feel fine. I feel totally fine. Really? You're really old.
Yeah.
You sure?
Have you thought about smoking more cigarettes?
Anyway, things, Jay, because I just thought they're all like, we know we can't do the next thing until they're all gone.
Right.
Like, come on, dude. Now, there's only 3 left, guys. Just keep walking.
That is so funny.
Okay, so there's... Okay, so yeah, I've hundreds of those. I could pepper those in.
Yeah, you could.
I got lots of those. Okay.
You could have a story of the day calendar. Thought of the day with Jay.
Weird Bible thought.
Yes.
You know, number 87. Yeah, I do. I have lots of them. They find their ways into my sermons. I find them better than anyone else.
Of course.
No one enjoys them.
You're cracking up, and everyone's like, please move on.
Is there a sermon here somewhere?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, so I think we're about out of time. But listen, we had a lot of good people we've talked to over this.
We really did.
I mean, Christina, got so much feedback from Christina's.
Oh, her story was great.
Her story and the saying, you know, hello as much as you say goodbye.
Yep.
And the power of managing, you know, walking through betrayal, and processing those things, not allowing those things to be the last way that you understand leading or people. That's huge. I mean, I already talked about Ruben. I mean, man, if you get done listening to that guy and you don't want to follow him, I don't know what it takes for you to follow people. Humble dude.
Yeah.
Full of guts, going for it. That was a fun one. What else am I missing?
Ted Kim.
My goodness. Ted Kim.
The future rhyming with the past.
Yeah.
But not slavishly imitating the past.
No. Well, and it was a great second part to even his talk in Phoenix. That was that was good.
Yeah, Ted was remarkable. Dave Ferguson was so fun.
Yeah,
he was
the old man, Dave Ferguson.
Yes, he was so old that his wisdom really shined through.
Oh,
no,
Dave.
But in all seriousness,
I hope you hear this, Dave.
I do too. But in all seriousness, I just found the guy so inspiring.
No, deeply inspiring.
Because he's lived the things that he's saying, and he's willing to hold the tension of having massive vision with also recognizing human fragility, the amount of work it's going to take, and the need for the Lord to bless. He's not trying to manufacture anything false.
He spent some time with us at Exponential that we went with a whole bunch of Vineyard people. He did something that has just messed me up. I can't stop thinking about it, where he pretty much said the breadth and the depth and the scope of your dreams and how present they are, how concrete they are. You can make them concrete. They will affect and change every way you see every part of your life.
Wow, interesting. Yeah.
If those are held in front of you, your day-to-day prayers, your day-to-day suffering, the losses, the costs suddenly have purpose. And that really struck me at how many times when I feel most purposeful is because I have a big dream in front of me.
Yeah, totally.
When something seems a little painful, it's worth it if it's like I'm trying to do something.
Yeah.
But when I lose track of that,
those
things are so all-encompassing and sad and hard to manage.
Sure.
Then my prayers are pretty small.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was it.
Well, and the interesting thing about that is that when the Lord is actually calling you to your life's vocation, it's almost certainly going to be something that's easier to lose track of.
Yes.
Right? Because you're building something for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. You're not just, my dream is to do this one thing, but my dream is to
be all the things.
Be all the things.
For a long time.
Exactly.
I mean, and his story, which I'm redoing his talk, but here it is. Here's his story that which should encourage everybody. He says, this older mentor guy says to him, give me your dreams for your church. And what do you think you're doing? And what's the call of God on your life? It says all the things. And the guy stands up, like across the table, stands up and starts poking him in the chest. And he says, why do I have a bigger dream for your church than you do?
Wow.
And then personalizes it. Why do I have a bigger dream for your life than you do? I mean, that's a ministry. We just walk around poking people in the chest saying that.
It would have to be true.
Well, I mean, that's true. There is that small detail. But anyway.
That's a powerful thought.
Isn't that powerful?
Yeah, it really is.
And he said, so that's part of the job of a leader too, is to call the dreams out of people.
Yes.
Like, man, that's all you got? Man, I believe more for you than that. Anyway, but he's just full of that stuff, right?
Yeah,
like
he is. You can. It's wonderful. He's very
pours out
guy.
of him. Yeah, so he's worth looking at. We had Brian McLeese.
Yep, Brian,
who is incredible,
an old school vineyard guy.
He was
there with Ken Gullickson back in the very, very beginning.
That is at the very beginning.
Yeah,
and John Wimber stamping on his feet.
Yeah.
Great story. Not a great ministry model. We're not recommending it.
Yeah, don't stamp on
happened
anyone.
Nonetheless.
Yes.
And it's been working out for him, so that's good.
Yep.
Did we miss anybody?
Oh, Joel Seymour.
Joel.
What a wonderful guy.
Wonderful guy. So anyway, these.
Are you intentionally not mentioning Rob Morgan?
Well, I just love Rob so much that he's always on my mind.
Yes, he is. And then of course the great Phil Strout was the first
Phil Strout was the very first, and Steve Cuss.
The best.
Is the best. He's been my friend for a long time. I mean, his book that we're having people read, incredible
Managing Leadership
time.
Anxiety.
That's right.
Is there anxiety in leadership?
I mean, for some people.
Other people experience anxious moments.
Float above the earth. Yeah, I don't know who those people are. I don't want to meet them. I wouldn't like them. They wouldn't like me. That's for sure.
That's right.
Well, anyway, so it's good to catch up, talk about these things, Caleb. Hopefully, people will go back and catch up on some of these different things. We don't have enough time to talk through all of them.
Yeah, totally.
But we easily could. And then I think we're going to get to do this again.
I look forward to it very much, Jay.
All right. Thanks, Caleb.
See ya.
The We Are Vineyard podcast is a production from the team at Vineyard USA. If you've been enjoying the podcast, here's a few ways you can help us. Leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Connect with us online for additional resources. Our website is vineyardusa.org, and we're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at @VineyardUSA. Thanks for listening. See you next week.